been quite a while since I did a fighting game garbage, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that I've just been having more fun doing other stuff, and another reason is that, I don't know, I kind of think positivity is cool. Like, a big part of what I want out of my channel is for people to actually get into the games that I talk about, and I feel like that's a lot less likely if I'm talking about things that are genuinely bad. However, Fighting Game Garbage is back, and we're doing something a little bit different with it today. See, what we're talking about today isn't weak at all, it's actually pretty good, but it's probably one of the single most universally hated mechanics in a recent fighting game. Today, we're talking about Breakaway in Mortal Kombat 11. Now, if you like Breakaway, that's completely fine. I myself, I'm just kind of indifferent to it. Like, I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. I think it's a decent idea that just has some problems in practice. I'm not here to convince you that this is objectively terrible or anything. I just kind of want to explain why the people who feel about it so negatively feel the way they do. Breakaway is a defensive mechanic in Mortal Kombat 11 that allows you to escape launch combos by falling to the ground with armor for 2 defensive bars. Breakaway is Mortal Kombat 11's answer to the Breaker from Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat X. In Mortal Kombat X, Breaker allows you to spend 2 bars to break out of any combo from the second hit onwards, launch or grounded. It resets both players back to neutral. Now, in fairness, I think on paper, Breakaway is a pretty good idea. I think it's a smart way of, having something like Breaker that wouldn't be too strong in the context of Mortal Kombat 11. If you just took Breaker as is and slapped it into Mortal Kombat 11, I think it would be kind of awful. Breaker's pretty crazy, but so is MKX. Mortal Kombat 11 is a lot more toned down in comparison, so having something like Breaker it'd be a bit much in my opinion. You also gotta remember that how meter works in this game wouldn't work with something like Breaker. See, in Mortal Kombat 11, you have 2 separate meters for offensive and defensive uses, and instead of earning it by hitting the opponent or being hit yourself, it just regenerates automatically over time, even between rounds. I think it would be really, really fucked up if you had a regular ass Breaker in this game and you just got it for free over time, and on top of that, it only used defensive bar. So on top of the fact you're getting this incredibly powerful tool for free, you don't even give up any offensive potential by using it. I think on paper, Breakaway is a good idea. I also like the situation after Breakaway. On paper, I think it's a good idea. Like, resetting both characters to neutral after Breaker in MKX, I think that works for MKX, that's fine. But in MK11, I do like the thinking behind, like, okay, you can break out of the opponent's combo, but you'll probably take a little bit of damage on the way down, and when you're waking up, you don't have access to any of your wake-up options because you just spent all your defensive bar, so even if they don't get their combo, they at least get a mix-up. I like the idea, but in practice it's got some problems that we'll get into later. Now, I think Breakaway and some of the things designed around it in this game have one big fundamental issue, but I think it makes more sense to start off with some of the smaller issues and work our way up to that. So, first off, I mean, look at it. This is like the lamest looking defensive option I've ever seen in a fighting game. Like, a lot of big defensive options like this that require some kind of a resource or they're integral to the game, they're kind of flashy, Like, burst looks pretty cool, V-shift looks kind of cool, third strike parry, it makes a cool funny little noise. This is lame, I don't like it. Something you've probably heard quite a lot of people complain about is how easy it is to get an accidental breakaway. See, the input for Breakaway is down and block. And even though that's something you're going to be hitting in neutral quite a lot, that might seem fine because, you can only use Breakaway once you've been launched into the air. The problem is that unlike MKX, where you can only use Breaker from the second hit of a combo onwards, in MK11 you can use Breakaway as soon as you're launched into the air. And this is a problem when you have moves that technically launch, even though they don't give any kind of a combo afterwards. For example, Kotal's forward 4 is a really good mid-hitting poke that he'll use in neutral a lot, but even though it doesn't give a combo, it technically launches. So if you try to crouch block it just a smidge too late, that'll happen. And you've just wasted 2 defensive bars. I've had this happen to me and it feels like shit. I don't know how they could have gotten around this. Maybe Breakaway could have been down in stance change. An issue that a few people I know and I personally have with Breakaway is that I feel like it's got really bad synergy with crushing blows that launch the opponent. I really like crushing blows. I think they're a great mechanic. I love the idea of fulfilling certain requirements so I can get, you know, extra damage on a move or a launch afterwards so I get a big combo. I think that's great, but the problem is you get crushing blows once a match and the opponent gets Breakaway several times a match. So it's like, I can't tell you the amount of times I've gotten my launching crushing blow, felt really good about it, and then gone, oh wait, they can just Breakaway. I guess I don't get my one chance at this. I'm kind of curious how other people feel about this, because it's something I personally really don't like. Now this next one is a pretty big problem with Breakaway in my opinion. See, earlier I mentioned how on paper I do like the idea of being able to escape the opponent's combo, but still leaving them with the advantage, because, you know, they don't get a combo, but you're knocked down right in front of them without any of your wake-up options, so they still get to push a mix-up. However, sometimes that's not the case, because there are situations where the opponent can break away from your combo and be left at advantage. Notice how that actually punished Shao Kahn. I'm minus after my own combo because my opponent broke out of it. Like, that's kind of shitty, right? It's called Breakaway. It should be an escape option, not a steal back my turn option. And I get that I'm showing one of the fastest buttons in the game punishing this, but it can get worse than that. Here's a pretty infamous clip from this year's EVO that I'm sure some of you might be familiar with.
Gentlemen, you don't want to give Sub-Zero for the comeback factor. You don't want to give Robocop. Oh my god, that's going to be it. That might be GG's. Stand for Fatal. That's going to be it. This Axe of Doom is going to come down on the winner's run.
Now, I completely get that you can make the argument, oh, well, they should have just not ended the combo in that. And yeah. But listen, I think you can make that argument and still understand why people don't like this. Like, there's a massive difference between the kind of mistake you'll typically make in a fighting game and, oh, I ended my guaranteed punish combo in the wrong ender. I should have ended it in something that doesn't get me punished on hit by the game's escape option. Right? Like, that's kind of whack. I don't think there's any getting around that. Personally, I think a really simple solution to this would be to make it so that using your breakaway forces you to delay your wake up. You already have the option to do this, but you never really see it from my experience. I think it would have been a great change because it mostly eliminates the issue of being able to punish your opponent's combo on hit, and in situations where breakaway already left your opponent plus, it just gives them more plus frames to work with. So here's the biggest problem with breakaway in my opinion. It's not even necessarily with breakaway, but more everything around it. The counterplay to breakaway feels just horribly inconsistent in my opinion. And it's weird because technically, on paper, there's a ton of different answers you have to it, like down 2, armor breakers, fatal blow, but it almost never feels like there's a concrete answer to breakaway, and I think that's a huge problem. Let's do a little comparison. How do you beat V-shift? Well, meaty throw is one of your most consistent options. How do you beat burst in Strive? Well, you can bait it, and then you can punish it. Obviously, these aren't the only answers to these defensive options, and there are plenty of defensive options that do not have clear-cut answers. Like, you could write a fucking 20,000 word essay on Third Strike's wake-up game, and you would probably walk out with a C+. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to show that these, you know, big defensive options that require some kind of resource, they usually have at least one very consistent answer. So how do you beat breakaway? Well, the closest thing to a concrete answer is to just not give the opponent an opportunity to use breaker in the first place. but some characters are significantly better at this than others. And also, even with the characters that are good with unbreakable damage, you're not just going to go for unbreakable combos the entire game. When it comes to unbreakable damage, the vast majority of characters just get a string into a special move, which works out really well in some cases. And for other characters, it just kind of doesn't. Now, some of the characters with weaker breakaway options might have equipable specials that circumvent it a bit, but a lot of the time they're specials that the character wouldn't usually pick in most situations. Now, unbreakable combos get around breakaway, but they don't actually punish it. Your opponent is still going to have access to breakaway after you do an unbreakable combo to them, unless they use a get up attack, of course. So let's talk about some of the ways you can punish breakaway and the inherent issues with them. For the longest time, this was one of your two primary answers to breakaway, and it doesn't really look like it punishes breakaway, but in practice it sort of does. See, down 2 is a universal high damage normal, doing 14%. The high damage is what makes down 2 a good option here. See, breakaway doesn't give you invincibility or anything, it just gives you a damage resistance and armor before you hit the ground. Now, down 2 is handy because the opponent will usually take one attack before hitting the ground, and down 2 capitalizes on that by doing as much damage as possible with that one hit. This gives you a decent amount of guaranteed damage. It also does okay damage if the opponent chooses not to break away, but of course you are leaving a lot of damage on the table. A big problem with down 2, however, is that it's a normal. You can't cancel into it, which means that if the opponent uses breakaway to drop out of a string, it's not going to be any good for you because you won't be able to use it in time. The other option you had is Fatal Blow, which is a true armor breaker. Calling Fatal Blow a consistent answer to breakaway would be a massive fucking stretch though. On top of the fact that the opponent can have multiple breakaways in a match and you only get one Fatal Blow, you have to be at low health to use it, and they're not the best armor breakers in general. They do a lot of damage, but even though you can cancel into them, if you're doing a string and the opponent uses breakaway to fall out of the string, if you cancel into Fatal Blow, it'll often just whiff. The vast majority of Fatal Blows are either slow, don't have the best hitboxes, or are Shao Kahn's. Now, for the longest time, those were your two only concrete-ish answers to breakaway, but after the first combat pack, we finally got what was intended to be a concrete answer to breakaway, and that was the armor breaker. Now, I gotta be honest, right? I don't hate breakaway, but I hate how armor breakers were implemented. I think they are an absolute mess, personally. My big gripe with armor breakers is that there is little to no consistency across the board. For example, that was Scorpion's back 3 overhead, and when he breaks armor with it, it launches. Now, Kano's armor breaker is his back 1, which restands. But not all armor breakers are normals. Some characters have special moves as armor breakers. Spawn had the first armor breaker in the game. He had his when he came out, and other characters got theirs later. It's his back forward 3, and if you break armor with it and amplify, you get a launch where you usually wouldn't. A lot of armor breakers also just don't really make sense in my opinion. Like, Sonya's is her forward 3, which on top of being 8 frames slower than her down 2, which is the classic way to challenge breakaway, it actually does less damage in a lot of situations, which, like, what is this for? Why would you make it this? Spawn having the first armor breaker would also give us a little bit of insight into what I would consider a pretty big issue with them as a whole. See, Spawn has an equipable move called Charging Hellspawn. It's amazing, it's one of the best launches in the game, and it's one of the biggest reasons for his amazing damage output. But, if you equip this move, it's his back forward 3, replacing his armor breaker. So if you pick this, and if you're playing Spawn, you probably will, you just don't have an armor breaker, outside of Fatal Blow of course. Back when there were 3 competitive variations for each character, this was just a mess because a lot of the time a character's best variation just wouldn't have their armor breaker, which felt really wrong in my opinion. Even now, where custom variations are the standard in ranked and in tournaments, a lot of the time a character will just have one really important move that's pretty key to their kit, that just happens to replace their armor breaker. For example, one of Kotal Khan's best moves is this. It's an equipable launcher, and it's his main way to launch the opponent. If Kotal doesn't have this move equipped, he will be launching you significantly less. He has other options to launch you, but they usually require a crushing blow or they're not great, like his back 2 launcher. However, the move that gets replaced when you equip the launcher is his fucking armor breaker. One of the strangest things about how armor breakers were implemented to me is that there's one character who I think absolutely fucking nails them, and that's Shao Kahn. Shao Kahn is the only character in the game to have 3 armor breakers instead of 1. The first is the down amplified version of his shoulder charge. I think this is pretty smart because, as I showed earlier, if you break away the normal amplify, Shao Kahn is left minus. His second armor breaker is his down back 1 anti-air grab, and it's fine. You can amplify it to get a bit more damage, but there's nothing special about it, it's just an armor breaker. What I really like though is that at the time you gotta remember there were 3 competitive variations for each character, and Shao Kahn's third variation didn't have either of these moves. His anti-air grab was replaced with an anti-air spear, and his shoulder charge was replaced with a spear charge. However, instead of just having no armor breaker in variation 3, his new anti-air spear is also an armor breaker, and it's actually a better armor breaker than the old anti-air grab because you get a combo afterwards if you amplify. I thought this was really cool. I wish more characters did this. Now, I completely understand that you could argue, oh, well, different characters are just designed around having different armor breakers, you know? That's just how they're balanced. Some are going to have better ones, some are going to have worse ones, some won't have them at all, and some will always have them. And, maybe, but I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me at all. Like, Breakaway is consistent for every single character. It is performed the exact same way, it acts the exact same way. So, it's just a bit weird that the solution to Breakaway, which was added so long after the game launched, is so inconsistent across the cast. Like, imagine if when V-Shift was added to Street Fighter V, certain characters only had it in V-Trigger, or they had to spend a bar for it, or didn't have one at all, you know? I don't know. I didn't like the direction they went with them at all. Also, I've talked about 3 primary ways to beat Breakaway, and there are certain situations where if the opponent breakaways at the right time or fast enough, none of them work. Which, I don't know, again, that feels kinda gross. Now, I'm sorry if this felt a bit opinionated, or if I got a bit too upset near the end, maybe. I'm just trying to share my opinion, and opinions that I've seen from other people. I'm not trying to shift your opinion, per se. But, I don't know. It's just a bit of a messy mechanic, in my opinion, so there's a lot to say about it, really. I'm sorry if near the end this started to sound like fighting game garbage armor breakers, but, man, I am really passionate about the armor breakers. I was not a fan how that went. I'm very curious what other people think who have experience with MK11, so let me know. around this would have who the fuck is that? What do you fucking think you're doing?